And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Dr. Owen Phelps, author of The Catholic Vision for Leading Like Jesus, published by our Sunday Visitor. Welcome, Dr. Phelps, to EWTN's Bookmark.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Great to have you here, and I'll explain why. Because you've been on The Abundant Life, and people might have seen you on there, but you and I go back a few years to a series that I did with Bishop Doran up in your Rockford diocese, right? Right. Probably 10 years now.
Right, and the Bishop had written a book, and you were kind enough to come up and do a location, a whole series. It was at 5 or 6 programs, and it was wonderful to have you there and to meet you and meet
the Crossroads,
staff.
right?
Yes,
right. Was the name of it?
Crossroads of Hope.
Now, this is your book, The Catholic Vision for Leading Like Jesus. Now, the subtitle is Introducing S Cubed, or S to the Third Power: Leadership, Servant, Steward, Shepherd. What is this S Cubed thing?
Well, I've been working with Ken Blanchard in a program in Phil Hodges called Lead Like Jesus, and it's focused on servant leadership. And of course, there's a great amount of research out there in the secular world today about the power of servant leadership. But as we looked at the program, we said, we'd like to be able to take this into the Catholic audiences, and we think we need to add a few things, and particularly in the area of the habits. We have to talk about...
Not religious habits, but actually what?
Well, but actually, as a matter of fact, among the habits, one would be to worship regularly and receive the sacraments. Right. In an ecumenical environment, we're going to talk about worship regularly, but we Catholics have the opportunity for daily Mass.
We got Mass and sacramentals and other things you all
the
added in, right?
sacramentals, the great devotional life of the Church.
Right, the saints.
Right, as examples and as teachers, So we wanted to add all of that. We said that's got to be in there. An awareness of social justice and the great teaching about that. We have to talk about the laity and the purpose of the laity. I say I grew up Catholic thinking that my obligations were pray, pay, and obey, and I thought if I got 2 out of 3, I'd be doing pretty good.
Right.
I don't want to say which two, but I mean, it probably varied. But as we looked at the church teaching over the years, we could see that really the laity have a vocation, and it's to sanctify the world.
Right.
Wow, that's big work, And so, in a sense, we're all called to be leaders. Right. And then there's just the natural dynamic. We're all being watched all the time. As parents, we're setting examples for our children and teaching them all the time. You probably remember maybe Charles Barkley, the NBA basketball player.
Sure.
Some years ago, they said,
"Well,
you're
Alabama.
a role model."
We remember Charles Barkley.
Yeah, he said, you're a role model. And he said, "No, I'm not." Well, I mean, everybody said, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
The kids are imitating
whether
you.
you like it or not, you are.
There you are. And
that adds a level of responsibility to people that sometimes they don't want, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's not an easier way to live as a Catholic, but I think it's more aware of the reality that how we live will draw people closer to God and to the selves that God intended them to be, or it'll drive them away.
Now, let me ask you, you were kind of involved with this organization, and Ken Blanchard's probably best known for what book?
Oh, the 1 Minute Manager.
The 1 Minute
Yeah,
Manager.
I think it sold 15 million copies or something.
So you got involved. Whose idea was it to adapt this into a Catholic audience, or for a Catholic audience?
Well, partly myself and a colleague of mine, Dick Kunert, coming back from an encounter, we were saying, wow, that's dynamite. And I'd been doing some leadership training for our bishop, drawing from the scriptures. Over the years, working for the church and running my own companies, I sort of intuitively become aware of so much good in the scriptures about how to lead and Jesus' own selfless leadership. Whatever you're doing anywhere in life, there's this fundamental choice. Am I going to be self-centered or other-centered? Or as we would say, self-centered or God-centered. Because if you're going to be other-centered, the issue comes in, what other? Well, I'm going to be centered on getting a Mercedes, or I'm going to be centered on a bigger house or a trophy wife. And, it's like the great parable in Scripture itself, where are you going to build your house on sand, or are you going to build it on rock? And so, being God-centered, we think is the way to be able to build a life, and a life of leadership on the firm foundation of reality.
Right. In the forward, Ken Blanchard mentions that we have to recognize our fundamental self-centeredness and commit ourselves daily to becoming ever more God's servant in the image of Jesus' own character. How did you go about doing that?
Well, as I tell people at the beginning of every seminar I present, the first thing you should know, no matter what the introducer here has said, is that I'm a sinner. And I think we have to recognize that, that we're all, in a sense, wounded healers, that we're all struggling to do better each day. I mean, I think sometimes we get such a fixation on good that we forget that probably the work is more about better, than being good, than judging ourselves. This sort of self-justification.
Right.
The issue is, am I better today than I was yesterday? And if not, why not? And then how can I get back on track tomorrow?
And kind of a very Catholic, ongoing, working out my salvation in fear and trembling.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
And understanding that there's a communal dimension to that. In the Catechism, it talks about the sacraments of holy orders and matrimony, and it says, and pardon the paraphrase, but that if these sacraments have anything to do with one's own eternal salvation, it's only through the capacity of service that they do.
Right.
That going into that sacrament is not like getting a ticket to eternity.
Sure, husband and wife and serving each other and serving their family, and of course, obviously a priest serving his flock.
Absolutely. So the servant piece is real easy. We recognize, though, too, that to be a servant, you have to understand something. And the servant part of it says, it's not about me. The steward part says, it's not mine. I'm a caretaker. And imagine how Wall Street would have been different with that sense 10 years ago.
A lot of times as Catholics, when we hear servant, we kind of understand, okay, we're supposed to help each other. We hear steward, we think, oh, somebody wants my money.
Yeah.
That's what stewardship means. When they get outside, having a stewardship meeting, they're raising money for something.
10%.
What do you mean by stewardship?
Well, steward is an outlook, and actually you adopt it and it becomes a second nature that says, I don't own any of this. It's getting away from that thing in our culture of entitlement. We take life for granted. We always start with, well, here I am. I think, therefore I am, or all these things. But the I is not a for granted piece of it. We're alive in this moment because God's willing it. We breathe because God's breathing into us. And so there's that we exist because of a divine will. At that point, you're saying, look, none of it's mine. All of it is a grace. Right. But obviously, God didn't give it to me, so, I could walk around, like a rooster somewhere. Right. There must have been a purpose. And, of course, that purpose we know.
But does that mean that somebody is obligated to give it all away, or in what way are they obligated to give it away?
Well, you know what? Jesus gave it all away, right? He gave his life. Usually when we think of giving away, we think, as you say, money or possessions. But, what stewardship tells us is about giving our life to building the kingdom. Giving our life, if we want to lead like Jesus, what we want to do is the will of the Father. That's, that's what unites, I think, all Christians around Jesus, is that awareness that you may think of him as, some people say, well, he's an institution builder. Other people say, well, he was something of a radical because he went over against the scribes and the Pharisees. And so each of us has our own image of Jesus. Obviously, Jesus is larger than any of us can contain, so that's fine. But I think we all come together on Jesus was here for a purpose, to do the will of his Father. And so are we going to give our life over to that same goal? In this society, we struggle so much with who am I, as if we have to invent ourselves. I think the real question is, whose am I? What is worthy of my life?
Right. Is it also difficult, though, for people, because let's say somebody says, I want to do that, but I'm not sure what that means for me.
Oh, I think we all struggle with that, and I think you have some people who are driven, and then you have people who are called, have a sense of calling. And, people who have a sense of calling, I'm looking for a word, but there's a sense of more gentleness, certainly a more respect for the other person. I'm mindful of the angel Gabriel visiting the Blessed Virgin Mary with a 14-year-old kid. And you could just see God showing up in the presence of that angel saying, hey, guess what? I've got a really big plan to save the world, and you're a part of it. And Mary's, we all marvel at Mary agreeing. But if you look at that passage, she doesn't agree right away. She's got some questions. And you don't see the angel saying, hey, come on, this is a big plan. I mean, this is to save the world. Just shut up and do what you're told. No, he listens attentively and he answers her questions and he reassures her. You know, if God treats us that way, how ought we to treat one another?
And also, a lot of that comes out of true humility, because it's not only it's a focus of what it means, but how could I possibly be the one you would want to do this?
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what you kind of talk about, the idea that some of us aren't necessarily called to leadership, but we're leaders by default, whether you like it or not.
That's right.
God takes the humblest out there and maybe exalts them and asks them to do the great.
You know, think of every prophet. Right. You know, it's like, I can't talk, I can't think, I'm shy, I'm not equipped.
Right.
You know, none of us
are. Moses and Aaron, right?
Yeah.
Perfect example.
None of us are fully equipped ever. I mean, reality is emergent. It's becoming in each moment. That's the way God built the world. And if we were to sit back and say, you know what, I've got all the answers and I'm ready to take it on, rather than being a servant of God, we're starting to play God there, and that's dangerous.
Now, we talked about servant and steward, and you've got here S to the third power. The third one here is shepherd leadership. Now, shepherd leadership, is that bishops? What do you mean by shepherd leadership?
Well, frankly, and just as an aside, I think I see the very best leadership of this not in organizations, be it the church or private business or NGOs. It's in the family, because that's where you see the most love and the most selflessness. And frankly, that's where you see the most human development. So I think the family really serves as a paradigm for how we should lead in other places, okay? But shepherd, I got to tell you, that was my exercise in humility. I really had decided we've got to present the notion of servant and steward together. And I was talking to Ken Blanchard. Ken and Phil and I were going actually to a class he teaches at the University of San Diego, Catholic school out in California. And I was talking to him about, we're going to go with S2. And he said, well, why not S3? And I said, sure. I mean, he's the expert.
Okay.
Right? Then I said, I sort of felt like Bill Cosby being, Noah building the ark. Sure, God, what's a cubit?
Right.
So I said, sure, S3. What's that third S? And Ken said, shepherd. And I backed off. And I tried to be subtle about it, of course, but I said, well, yeah, let me think about that. And frankly, I had an issue with, I didn't want to be thought of as a dumb sheep. Usually it's the laity then that you just follow around and do what you're told. But I went back to the scriptures and I saw how Jesus uses that metaphor. And when I did that, I said, absolutely, we've got to include it. Most of us don't grow up in a rural environment, so we see those little lambs around the statues of the lambs around the crib scene, and everything's so docile. Sheep aren't docile. And Jesus says time and again, if you're not a good shepherd, the sheep are not going to stick around. The problem is when they run off, then they suffer. And so then does the shepherd. So there's some obligations here. It's on the leader, it's on the shepherd to take care of those sheep and build trust. And in that sense, I thought, okay, I can do this.
And the sheep are really counting on the shepherd.
Absolutely.
They're absolutely counting on.